Hey everyone, I am ready to start talking about this Mars in retrograde transit. I've got this graphic up here of all of the important dates that this Mars in Capricorn transit brings. As you can see, there are a lot of dates and there are a lot of important events. I am not going to go into great detail about each of these individual events, only because this video would be like 3 hours long, and who has time for that? So, what I am going to do though is talk about what Mars is. I always feel like I don't want to expect that you fully understand exactly what Mars is. I feel like it's so much information out on the internet and it's really hard to know what's accurate. But I try my best to explain things in a very logical way so that, given the facts and the data, you can come to the same conclusion as me. And I say that with an eye roll because I feel like people can use data to make it mean whatever they want. But in any case, here we are. So we're going to talk about Mars. We are going to talk about Capricorn, one of my favorite signs. I must say, I'm kind of partial. And we're going to talk about what it means for Mars to be in Capricorn and what each of your signs can expect. So, when I start talking about the signs, I am talking about primarily first your rising sign. That is the most time sensitive portion of your chart, the most unique identifying factor of your chart. Everyone born within the same 30-day period as you, and let me turn this video on so y'all can stop looking at this and see my cute face. All right. So, everyone born within the same 30-day period as you is going to have the same sun sign. Within that 30-day period, there is a 2 to 2.5 day period where the moon remains in one sign. So, in order for someone to have the same sun and moon combination as you, and all pretty much the same uh, other planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, whatever, they have to be born within the same 2.5 day period in that 30-day period. And so, in order for someone to have the same sun, moon, and rising with you, and generally the same other planets, they have to be born within the same 2 hour period to 2.5 hour period of that 2.5 day period where the moon is in the same sign, of that 30-day period where the sun is in the same sign. So I know it's really easy and accessible to know your sun sign, but if you really want to use astrology in a constructive and productive way, you really need to know the rest of your chart. So I post this link all the time, but I'll give you the URL. If you go to orcle.me/chart guide, you can follow the instructions I've given to um, cast your sidereal birth chart. You can also go to my website, thepeoplesoracle.com, and at the top there's a link that will go directly to that guide I've created, and it will teach you how to erect your sidereal birth chart using astro.com. Do not use Cafe Astrology. Do not Google sidereal birth chart because there's some other website out there that's giving people some kind of crazy chart that is not the correct chart. So use the instructions I've provided on using astro.com, and that way you will have your sidereal birth chart. You want to know what your rising sign is, you want to know what your moon sign is, and you want to know what your sun sign is in sidereal so that you can make the best use of the information that I'm going to give you. So let's start by talking about Mars. Every planet rules two signs, meaning it is at home in two signs. It has command or governorship of two signs, with the exception of the sun and moon. They each rule one sign each. But it is through those signs that we can really come to understand what a planet means. So for Mars, that means that there's going to be Aries, which is fire, cardinal, and Scorpio, which is water, and that is fixed. So let's start by talking about um, cardinal fire here. Okay, fire makes things burn up and consumes them. It needs fuel like air. Fire refine things, like if you take raw ore and put it in the appropriate temperature of fire, it will refine that down into a metal that you can use and shape and forge, like iron or silver or metal. It removes the dross, which is all of the extraneous minerals that are within that ore that keep you from having, say, pure gold or pure silver. So fire refines, it moves everything away that you don't need and that you don't use. When you have too much fire, it burns things up and consumes things. Fire is action and movement. It means go, okay? And so cardinal fire, cardinal means to enforce. And so when you are enforcing this refining process, what you're really saying is, this is where I begin and this is where you end. And if you want to cross that line, we can fight, right? That's what Aries says. Aries is territorial. It's marking out the space where it is. It's enforcing its boundaries through action. So this is not something defensive where you sit and you're waiting, right? That's Scorpio. Aries is like, I'm going and I'm going to let you know whose is what, okay? Aries is self-assertion and self-preservation through defending the body, right? You know, through fighting or whatever you need to do to mark your territory in an active way. Again, not in a defensive, internal way. That's more Scorpio. Now, within that, though, is a sense of autonomy, right? The freedom to act and move, using a sense of entitlement. I can move, I can be here, I can take up space. I can go if I identify something that I want or that I identify as mine, then I can have that. That's that healthy sense of entitlement that Aries teaches us. I was writing the other day when I asked people to tell me about the sign that confuses them most. Of course, eventually I ended up writing about every sign, but one of the things that I wrote about Aries was that, Aries doesn't sit around and wonder whether the action that they're going to take is going to affect or hurt other people, right? They don't care. They go for it. Just like a toddler. When a toddler is climbing the pantry closet to get something off the top shelf that they think they want, they're not considering the consequences or how it will make other people feel. They're considering their own desires, wants, and feelings. And this is a healthy sense of entitlement. Now, let's talk about Scorpio. Scorpio is the other home of Mars, and this is the fixed water home. So when we start talking about water, we are talking about the physical body. The physical body is encased in water in the womb. It is nourished by the water or milk of the breast. And then out in the world, you still need water to live. So water is really the body. It's the hormonal flow, the cycles and the moods of the body, the needs of the body. And so when we're talking about fixed water, we're talking about sustaining and maintaining the physical body. So we have a kind of emotional autonomy rather than the physical autonomy, which is movement. We have preserving emotional boundaries rather than physical boundaries, again, which is Aries. So the emotional boundaries of Scorpio are about saying, I have a right to feel how I feel, and I do not have to consider your feelings. Okay, this is emotional autonomy, the freedom to feel, the right to not have to consider some other person's feelings for the sake of your own self preservation. And so that's another word that's very important for Mars. We've got autonomy, which is both physical and emotional. We've got self-preservation, which is done by enforcing physical boundaries or emotional boundaries. We have a healthy sense of entitlement. And again, this is a real live active entitlement. I have a right to that. I want it. I can have it. I'm going to go get it. Who can stop me? That's Aries. But then we have the emotional entitlement is that you cannot talk me out of my anger. You cannot talk me out of my happiness. You cannot use your rationality and logic, that's Libra, which precedes Scorpio, in order to tell me that I shouldn't feel how I feel. You cannot use manipulation or reason in order to talk me out of my feelings. Okay? So these are the very, I think, clear significations of Mars. We have all of these themes here that are going to be important to us over the next 5 months. So what is Capricorn? Right? Mars is going to spend 5 months in Capricorn beginning May 2nd, 2018, continuing through the summer, through a stationary retrograde, an eclipse, a direct station, and then finally leaving Capricorn for Aquarius on November 5th, 2018. So a lot of stuff happening within that time frame. But what is Capricorn? I've got two words for Capricorn that I want to focus on. I'll probably add some more, but these two are the major ones. Number one is economy, and number two is sobriety. Okay, these two words are related. Economy, in the sense that I'm using it for Capricorn, means to make the best use of the resources that you have and that are available to you. In order to make the best use of your resources, you have to soberly, with sobriety, assess them. That means that I'm laughing because the first thing that popped in my head, like, I'm sorry, all of you law of attraction people, you cannot law of attraction your way to economy. You have to be able to say, this is what I have, this is what I don't have, this is the amount of time I have, this is the amount of money I have, this is how much physical energy I have, this is the food that I have, this is what's in my kitchen, this is how much gas I have in my car, right? You have to soberly assess these things and be willing to accept what is. This is what Capricorn is about. So when I talk about Capricorn being naturally managerial, what I mean is that Capricorn is very good at coming into your situation, whether invited or not, and being able to assess not only what it is that you have, but whether or not you're using it to the best of your ability, whether or not you are using it to its full potential, whether or not you're making the best use of it. And so I always talk about Capricorn improving your car, improving your job, improving your relationship, improving you, right? Because Capricorn can come and say, man, you're so good at drawing, but you could be doing so much more with that. What are you doing with it? What are your goals? How can we make this thing work for you? Okay, now some other words that I want to add for Capricorn is earn and deserve. And these are very, 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 very important because Mars is all about our healthy sense of entitlement. And sometimes it's unhealthy. Sometimes we feel entitled to things that aren't ours, or we feel entitled to things that we haven't worked for and earned. And so this is where Mars exalted in Capricorn comes into place. Mars in Capricorn wants us to all develop a healthy sense of entitlement. This means that you have a right to live. You have a right to your territory. You have a right to emotional autonomy. But being under the command of Saturn, which is the commander, governor, or ruler of Capricorn, Mars in Capricorn is saying that you need to soberly assess your environment and your resources in order to really be effectively autonomous. Is that a word? I think so. You need to be well aware of your limitations in order to be autonomous. The fact of the matter is that you cannot have whatever you want. You cannot be whatever you want. I know that there's so many spiritual doctrines out here teaching you that if only you envision and you command your emotions and feel the right feeling, it's like that's just not true. It's not true. You cannot be, do, and have whatever you want. There are limitations. There are other people that you have to consider. You're not going to live forever. You know, if you're 80, good luck running your first marathon. With exception, there are going to be people who can do that. But for the most part, age is a really real limitation that keeps us from being able to do whatever we want. Time is, money is. And so as Mars enters Capricorn next week, it is very, very important that we begin to think soberly about our resources. A little bit later in this video, I'm going to talk about what that means for each sign, whether that's your moon sign, your rising sign, or your sun sign. So as I've said before, go to thepeoplesoracle.com and use the link at the top in the menu to find a guide that I've written that will help you cast your sidereal birth chart using astro.com. Again, do not go to any other website besides astro.com because it is not reliable. So let's see, we've got economy, we've got sobriety, and we've got earn and deserve. So Capricorn is very much about you do not deserve anything that you have not worked for. Okay? If you have not put in the commiserate time or energy or resources, then you don't deserve it. And so Capricorn and Mars in Capricorn wants us to earn the entitlement. It wants us to deserve it by putting forth the effort, by using what we have. That brings me to my final word. Well, not my final, I got two more. My next word for Capricorn, and that is transactional. Transactional simply means you can't get something for nothing. And if you got something for nothing, best believe somebody else paid for it. Okay? So, transactional is all about what are you willing to give for what it is that you want? And what are you getting in return for what you give? So this is not all about you working hard for what you want. It is also about making sure that you are getting something in return commiserate with what you have given. That is what transactional means. So this is not about pouring your resources into an empty bucket with a hole in the bottom. Why? Because you have limited time, energy, and resources. This is what Capricorn is teaching us. And so the economy of our lives, which is what we're really talking about here, means that I have to be in full awareness, soberly assessing my limitations and my resources, whether that's my talents, my skills, my time, etc. And how can I use all of these things to make what it is that I want, right? What am I willing to do to earn what I want? Okay. So I'm going to read a few questions that I've written down here. Some of them I've asked already, but are you making the best use of what you have? In order to do that, you've got to know what you have, and you've got to be willing to call a spade a spade. Okay. Are you being sober? Right? No delusions of grandeur. No, oh, let me just sit here and think about what I want. Faith without works is dead, my friend. So you can believe all you want, but if there is no action taken, if there is no investment, then there is no return. All right? What are you willing to give for what you get? Again, that's your money, that's your time, that's your emotional labor, your physical labor, your talent, skills, and resources. And what are you getting in return for what you give? So again, the healthy entitlement, the discipline, the sober assessment, all of these things are what we are dealing with for the next 5 months, beginning May 2nd. Now, no transit comes out of the blue. So even this Mars retrograde in Capricorn, it's not coming out of the blue. This is not the first time that this has happened. However, there have only been 2 times within the past 120 years or so that Mars has gone retrograde in Capricorn. The most recent was 1971, and before that was 1939. Interestingly, both of those Mars retrograde transits preceded, at least in America, the entrance into major wars. 1939 preceded America's entrance into World War II, which wasn't until later in that decade. And the Mars retrograde in Capricorn of 1971 was, I guess, really in the thick of the Vietnam War. Obviously, the conditions for World War II were very well into play in Europe, even though at the time people may not have really been aware of it. And so even now, the conditions are already well into play. Russia interfered in America's elections. Russia interfered in the UK's Brexit referendum. Russia has interfered in many elections and different what am I trying to say? Cyber warfare and info wars, as they call it, not the website, but using information as a weapon. Okay, so all of that stuff is already in play. And we would do well to really pay attention to what's happening right now and over the next 5 months. But I want to focus on 1971. And those of you who follow me on Twitter at People's Oracle, you already know I've been talking about this at the very least since last fall because it is a big deal. 1971, there was a Mars retrograde in Capricorn, very similar to the retrograde that we're having this year. Why? Because the nodes were also in Cancer and Capricorn, which means that there were eclipses in Cancer and Capricorn. And matter of fact, there was an eclipse just like the one we're going to have in July. In 1971, there was an eclipse I can't remember if it was in Capricorn or Cancer, so forgive me for not having that data. I know I have it on my blog somewhere, but I believe it was a full moon lunar eclipse in Capricorn, and it was conjunct Mars, just like the July 27th, 2018 eclipse, which is a full moon eclipse in Capricorn, conjunct a retrograde Mars. Okay, so one of the things that happened very, very importantly then, obviously there was a lot of stuff going on with the Vietnam War and protest. There was a lot of stuff going on in the American economy. Something called the Nixon shock occurred in August of 1971. And at that time, Nixon took steps to create a purely fiat currency, removing all remnants of the gold standard for valuing the American dollar. And this was a really big deal. So when we talk about the words like economy and making the best use of our resource, this has really practical implications on a mundane level. And mundane astrology is this, the astrology of groups of people like nations or countries and the things that we experience together that affect large groups of people. Okay, so that happened. But there are some other dates that are really important that I think that you should write down, and that I think that you should sit down with your journal or just lying down thinking to figure out and remember what was happening for you in these time frames, because they are very important to this upcoming Mars retrograde. So I'm getting ready to list a few events that have happened over the past, I want to say 10 years, astrological events rather, that have happened over the past 10 years that are relevant to this retrograde. Now, I'm bringing these up because, as I said before, there is no retrograde that occurs within a vacuum. There's no transit that occurs within a vacuum. And there are parts of your chart and degrees of the zodiac within your chart that have been affected by transits in a major way. And every time we have one of those transits, we have events to refer back to, and it creates kind of a groove or marking place in our chart that's of relevance. So the first dates that we're going to go back to so that you can remember what was happening in your life in this area of your chart. And again, I'll give you what area of your chart that is in a little bit. But there was a Jupiter in Capricorn transit. Now, Jupiter transits Capricorn every 12 years. However, the last time that Jupiter was in Capricorn was in 2008 and 2009, and the nodes also happened to be in Cancer and Capricorn at that time. So that means that there was a major once every 12-year transit of Jupiter in Capricorn that coincided with eclipses in the same house and sign pair. All right, so that's a big deal. Again, that was end of 2008, mostly all the way through 2009, Jupiter in Capricorn with eclipses. Okay. One thing that I remember very clearly that happened that summer of 2009 was that Michael Jackson died. That was a really big deal. But there was a lot of stuff going on. Okay. After that, let's see, what do I have here? Okay, we come a little bit more recent. August 7th, 2017. There was an eclipse at 21 degrees Capricorn. Now, this is outside of the degree range where Mars will station and retrograde and direct, excuse me. But this is an important event because it's pretty recent in memory. And matter of fact, I skipped over one. No, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about that. Okay, I'm going to confuse you. Okay, so August 7th, 2017, there was an eclipse at 21 degrees Capricorn. So again, going back to the end of 2008 all the way through 2009 and August 7th, 2017, there is something that is in common with both of those time periods of your life. Okay, so be thinking about that. And I'm jumping all over here. Mars was last in Capricorn November 2016. Okay, so that was the last time that Mars was in Capricorn, and I'm pretty, confident that there were some things that occurred during that time that were important to what we're going to be experiencing. Now, for the very, very big one that I think is really the most important besides that eclipse from last August, was that from January 13th until February 14th, 2018, that's this year, so just a few months ago, we had the Sun, Mercury, and Venus all transiting through Capricorn, triggering the degrees or transiting over the degrees where Mars will station retrograde and direct, and where there will be an eclipse conjunct Mars retrograde during the summer. So what was happening for you in January and February? What was going on in your life? What were the major events? What are the major turning points? There was an eclipse actually on January 31st as well, where the sun was at 17 degrees Capricorn and the moon was at, I want to say 17 degrees Cancer, duh, full moon eclipse in Cancer. So that was close enough to the degree where Mars will station retrograde. Mars is going to station retrograde at 15 degrees Capricorn in uh, June, end of June. So the dates and times around that eclipse are very, very important. And if you really, 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 really want to dig in, you can use my uh, digital sidereal lunar transit calendar that you can kind of put into your phone and have all of the transits, dates and times where the moon is changing signs, and you can actually look and see where the Capricorn moon has been over the past 3 months. It's only been 3 times, so I think it's worth a look to see what was happening again. Okay, so just to recap, we go back to 2008 at the end of that year, I believe, through 2009 when Jupiter was in Capricorn and eclipses were in Cancer and Capricorn. I believe the eclipses started a little bit before Jupiter entered Capricorn, but that time period I think is good enough. Okay, then we talk about November 2016, which was the last time that Mars was in Capricorn. So, what was happening then for you? Um, the eclipse, August 7th, 2017. And there was an eclipse too. I skipped one. And I have those degrees in my graphic that I'm going to post on my blog and on Twitter that I showed you before. Let me pull it up for you. So I don't have a pointer on here, but if you go down to oops, see, I got a mistake there. This should say February 10th, 2017. So if you go down to November 3rd, 2018, Mars is going to transit 28 degrees Capricorn. That was the degree of the February 10th, 2017 eclipse. So that's another time period that you can think about. Okay, so we've got all these dates for you to take notes and think about what was happening in your life at that time relevant to these eclipses and to the Mars retrograde and Capricorn transit. Okay, so now on to my favorite part. Let's talk about the houses that are going to be transited for each sign. So, disclaimer again, I exclusively use the sidereal zodiac, and these transits will not apply to your tropical chart. If you are Capricorn in your tropical chart, if you have Capricorn placements in your tropical chart, no, 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 no. You need to get your sidereal chart. Whatever you think Capricorn is, just, let it go. And just take a little bit of a listen to what I'm saying here, okay? So let's start with Capricorn. This is your first house. The first house in the ascendant is you. It is your behavior and temperament. It is your physical body. So anytime we have transits to the first house, this is talking about you and your sense of identity, the actions that you take, your behaviors and habits. So these are going to be things that you do or things that happen to you. So if you are Capricorn rising, and this goes for Capricorn moon or sun too, but I want to be clear that rising sign is primarily what I'm using here and moon sign second. Okay, so Mars and Capricorn transiting your first house. This is about you and your personal autonomy. This is about your right to take up space. This is about your healthy entitlement. This is about your self-discipline. Okay, one of the words that I missed, how did I miss this? Because I've been tweeting about it forever, is unprecedented. Okay, if you were born after 1971, this is unprecedented for you. You've never had a Mars retrograde transit in your life, a Mars retrograde and Capricorn transit, in your life. So this is unprecedented. So for my Capricorn risings, you've never had Mars retrograde transiting your first house for 5 months. So when we talk about unprecedented Capricorn rising, what is it that you're willing to do now that you've never done before? What is it that you want that you've never had before, that you're finally feeling like, I got this, I can do this? Now, if you were born during the day, meaning that you were born before sunset and after sunrise, then this transit can be a little bit tricky for you. And you want to be careful about causing unnecessary fights, about escalating fights that you can't avoid, and about accidents that may harm your head, face, mouth, body. Okay, dental work, that might be something too that may come up during this time for you. So, Capricorn rising, this is your first house. Let's go into Aquarius. Aquarius is Saturn ruled too, but Mars will be transiting your 12th house. And the 12th house is a really fascinating place because the 12th house is where we go to get away from things and people that are familiar. And I always say that if you grew up in an abusive home or family or have been having a really tough time, the 12th house is the best place to go because that means you're going to be around people you don't know. You're going to be in circumstances that are unfamiliar, and you can forget, at least for the time being, the familiarity that has been troubling you. But for Mars to transit the 12th house is interesting because the 12th house can also be a place where things go to be unseen, or we feel like they're out of reach or out of grasp, or they're foreign or distant from us. The 12th house has relationship to Saturn. So the idea of lacking emotional affinity and being disconnected or detached from things. So for Aquarius rising, Aquarius really struggles with accepting limitations that are determined by things outside of their control. And so Mars and Capricorn in your 12th house is really admonishing you to be sober and to realize that your self-determining inclinations, Aquarius rising, sometimes need to really consider things that are outside of your control. There are people and things that get to determine parts of your reality. And so how can you go into your foreign environment, your secret place, your solo project, your self-reflection, and figure out what are these things that are having limitations on you that you don't want to acknowledge? And how can those things allow you to be empowered and to be the self-determined person that you really want to be. Self-determined merely means that you get to determine for yourself, by yourself, who you are. And you don't have to consider other people's definitions of your limitations or who you are. However, Capricorn Mars transiting your 12th house for 5 months, Aquarius rising, is reminding you that, yeah, there are some things outside of your control and outside of your ability to determine. And so what are you going to do about those things? Let's go on to, where are we at now? Let's go on to Pisces. All right. So Pisces is going to have Mars transiting their 11th house. The 11th house has a few primary significations that I think are important to mention here. The 11th house is the house of mentors, helpful people, people who may come along and say, ooh, I see what you're doing. I like it. Let me help you out. Let me introduce you to this person. Let me connect you with this resource. Let me mentor you and guide you to where you want to go. The 11th house is also audiences. It's the people with which we share what we have created. Being the house opposed the 5th house, these are the people who receive the things that we have created, our intellectual progeny, our biological progeny, our creative progeny, all of the things that we are producing, okay? The 11th house is our audience or our fans. Finally, the 11th house does have some associations with the wealth of the mother. And so these are assets and resources of our mother, whether it's actually her money or any other resources and assets that she has, like people and relationships and things like that. So for Pisces rising, and I did a thread earlier this year when there was a new moon in Capricorn during that time period that I gave you between January 13th and February 14th of 2018. There was a new moon in Capricorn pretty close to the degree where Mars is going to station direct at the end of August. And I made a list of tweets, which I will dig up and retweet for you guys, and I'll transfer it to my blog so that you guys can have it on demand to just have something to remind you of what you're dealing with over these next 5 months. But I remember talking about for Pisces rising, about how you are soberly assessing your own skills and resources so that you can be first for once, that you can be bold and entitled in a healthy way amongst your peers, right? You want to take a risk, or you want to do something that you've never done before in maybe a public way, Pisces. And so what are the skills and resources and talents that you've assessed? And how are you going to make use of them? And what are the avenues through which you're going to share them with the people who need what you have, that want to see what you've got? Aries, this is your 10th house. So this is your career, your public persona, your reputation. And by career, I do not mean your employment, not your actual job, but what it is that you are known for. The 10th house is also your superiors and supervisors or your bosses. So again, Aries rising, if you were born after sunset but before sunrise, that means you have a daytime chart. And you could be in for some conflict with superiors in your work. There may be some conflict that's been simmering beneath the surface and you've been trying to not set it off. And maybe in January and February things got real and you were like, oh crap, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to continue forward with things like this. And so Mars is saying that even if you cannot avoid a fight, there's a way to be sober. There is a way to not escalate that fight to the point where you burn bridges, which is something that Aries is very good at. Aries is not really interested in considering other people's feelings. That's Libra's job. Aries wants to take the risk and go after it so that they don't miss the opportunity. But now we're saying, what are the interactions that you're having with people in public, your supervisors and your bosses? And what are some things that you've wanted to do for a long time that maybe you didn't have the self-discipline in order to do? Maybe you felt like you shouldn't have to earn it. It's yours, right? What are you now willing to do differently in your career and reputation and your relationships with your superiors that says, you know what, I really do need to earn this and I'm willing to invest my time, energy, and resources in order to have it, right? Maybe you want to do something totally different. And now is the time for you to plot and plan and figure out how you're going to do that. Assess the resources available to you, whether that's the resources of people and relationships, money that you need to set aside for a brief period of unemployment, or whatever it may be. All right, let's go on to Taurus. And I'm moving through this quickly. I'm proud of myself. All right. So we are at Taurus. Taurus, this is going to be your ninth house. The ninth house is the house of gatekeepers. And one thing that I love about doing horoscopes this way is we really get to see how each sign on top of a house for each rising sign really contributes to how we understand that sign. So for Taurus, the ninth house is where Capricorn is. And for all of us, though, the ninth house is the house of gatekeepers. It is the institutions, organizations, bureaucracies, and such that allow us access to power, which would be like the government or any other hierarchical organization. It can be colleges and universities, which validate and grant us access to knowledge and information. Right? And it can also be formal religion, which again is granting us access to the divine through the rules, structures, and people who are granted authority, right? They validate our connection. So this is the ninth house. And for Taurus, Mars is going to be transiting here. So again, this can be a time period where you take on a role of gatekeeper or validator yourself, where you're ready to set a new precedent in your academic institution, in your religious organization, in your publishing or media organization, whatever it may be. This is a time where you are developing more autonomy to take the lead or to establish a new precedent in these areas of your life. The ninth house can also be saying that maybe you've been too much of a follower here and you need to be the one to take the lead. Taurus is fine with earning and deserving stuff, but sometimes Taurus doesn't have that get up and go. And so Mars is going to be trying your ascendant in your ninth house and is saying, look, now's the time to get up and go. Okay, don't be complacent in accepting something that you don't really want because you're comfortable, Taurus, in this ninth house area of your life. Gemini, this is the eighth house. The eighth house is a funky place. It's not sex. No, it's not sex. No, it's not sex. That's going to be Virgo rising's fifth house. But for Gemini rising, the eighth house is the ways in which our survival is irrevocably tied to other people. So whereas the second house, which is the house opposed the eighth house, the second house is our personal assets, resources, and money, how we earn our money and what do we have, our possessions and things like that. The eighth house is all of the things that we share with other people and how our physical material survival is tied up with them, whether it's because we share resources, whether it's because they're dependent on us or we're dependent on them, or because our life is really in someone else's hands. Sometimes we realize that we have the power of our own lives in our hands through contemplations of suicide and things like that. So the eighth house is also death and the things that we gain from death, so like inheritances. I always say if you have like Mercury or Venus or Jupiter in the eighth house, then you can inherit money or items from relatives. If the ruler of your fourth house is in the eighth house, then you can likely inherit land. If Saturn is in the eighth house as well, you can likely inherit land. Okay, but we're talking about Mars here. Mars transiting the eighth house in Gemini. So this could be a time where you decide to strategize how you're going to cut ties with someone. How are you going to get out and get your own? How are you going to break free from the dependence that you and this other person or people have financially with each other? What kind of risks are you taking? What kind of debt are you going to take on? Again, we're talking about investing so you earn and deserve. And we're talking about our wealth. But we're also talking about our life. So if you have planets in the eighth house, those planets, again, we're talking about Gemini rising, those planets in the eighth house can mean that there may be a separation or loss or death through an accident of the people signified by the planet in that chart. So if it's the sun, it could be the father or some other significant man in your sphere. If it's the moon, it could be the woman, or it could be your own body that there's an accident with for eighth house Gemini. All right, let's talk about Cancer. This is your seventh house. This is your partnerships and your relationships with open enemies, people you're beefing with, okay? So the seventh house is also your marriage partner or spouse, someone that you have some type of contract or agreement with, or your long-term partner. Okay, this is all the seventh house. And Mars is going to be transiting there. So there's a special interplay here between Cancer and Capricorn because they're opposing signs, and this is where the eclipses are going to be. And so opposing signs are not opposites as much as they are extremes of a polarity, which is more circular, right? Cancer, ruled by the moon, is the physical body and the things that we need in order to make that body survive. But Capricorn is the limitations of that physical body in the form of death, obviously, limitations in our time, energy, and resources, and the structures that provide a framework for us to feed the body. And so the seventh house for Cancer is talking about how your relationships feed you. How are you dealing with entitlement from your partner or from people that you're in a relationship with? What kind of relationships have been well overdue to end that you have been holding on to and you know you need to let go? Okay. Again, where Aries, the fire side of Mars, is content to burn bridges, Mars in Capricorn is saying, look, you don't want to burn this bridge. So you need to be strategic. Be mindful of your limitations. You never know when you need somebody, Cancer rising. And so how are you strategizing these relationships? How are you strategizing your exit? How are you dealing with your own entitlement in relationships? What's your relationship with entitlement? I'm using relationship like, well, we're talking about the seventh house, so deal with it. But what is your relationship with entitlement, and how does it manifest in your relationships? And what are you willing to do in order to have that healthy sense of entitlement, to carve out your boundaries? Okay, now we're on to Leo. This is your sixth house. Your sixth house is the obligations and duties you take on. I call the sixth house your job title, whether that is in your place of employment or in your home and family life. So what kind of obligations are you taking on in your personal life? And what is your job description in your work? Mars there could be saying you have been waiting for this particular position. You've been waiting for the opportunity to switch career fields. You've been waiting for the opportunity to apply for this particular job or position because you're ready to make a change in your job description. And so Mars in Capricorn is saying, all right, now, how are you going to strategize? What's your exit plan? Or what are the resources and skills that you need to take into consideration in order to make this happen? Do you need job search counseling? Do you need to have someone help you rewrite your resume so that you can soberly assess your skill set and figure out how you can use what you've got to get what you want, Leo rising? And now this is interesting because Leo is another one of those entitled signs. I don't have to earn nothing, right? By mere fact of being. The sun don't need nobody. That's a planet that rules Leo. It doesn't need anybody. Everyone else needs the sun. And so Leo can have that kind of entitlement sometimes. But Capricorn in the sixth house is saying, all right, you cannot rest on your laurels here and your sense of entitlement and demand things from people. You have to earn what it is that you want, and then you will deserve it. And so what are the obligations that you're willing to take on, Leo rising? We're almost done. All right, we're at Virgo rising. This is your fifth house. The fifth house is all of your progeny, intellectual, creative, biological. So that means your children, any works that you're producing, anything that you're writing. The fifth house is also sex and pleasure and creativity, fertility, conception, childbirth. All of those things are the fifth house. So are you trying to conceive? Is it time that you get the help of a professional in order to do that, Virgo rising? What projects have you been putting off? What creative endeavors have you been avoiding because you are not ready to make that commitment? Well, Mars and Capricorn is saying, get your discipline ready. It's time. Whatever it is that you want to produce, you need to be willing to invest in it. And it may not come as quickly as you're used to getting other things done, Virgo rising, but you have to be willing to deal with the limitations in your time, energy, and resources. This can also have to do with entitlement in your sexual and romantic relationships. Are you getting your needs met? Are you allowing yourself to experience joy and pleasure? Okay, it's a funny mix to feel like you have to earn pleasure, but I feel like for Virgo rising, you work enough so you can have what you want. All right. Let's talk about Libra rising. This is your fourth house, which is your actual physical dwelling place, your home where you put down roots, your ancestors, where you come from, who are the people that made you, your parents. All of these things are the fourth house. So Mars transiting this house could mean that you're making much needed repairs on your home because you've put them off too long and now an accident has occurred, so you need to get it fixed. Is your foundation slipping, literally or figuratively, Libra? This is your parents, okay? Your relationship with them, the past, and how all of those things have come about. What kind of reconciliations do you need to make with your past and with your parents? How are you developing autonomy while maintaining the respect for tradition and for your elders? How are you getting what it is that you want and what it is that you need? What are you willing to do for it? Also, keeping in mind that there is a hierarchy. There are elders. There are people who came before you who deserve acknowledgement. And so you cannot have your autonomy free from recognition of who those people are. In my thread that I did for that new moon in Capricorn for Libra, I talked about dealing with trauma that comes from your family line and how the buck is going to stop with you and what kind of investments are you willing to make in order to change the trajectory of your legacy, Libra rising. We're on to Scorpio rising, and this is your third house. The third house being opposed from the eighth house. Instead of talking about gatekeepers, we're talking about how we sidestep gatekeepers, how we interface with the divine, how we express our political opinions, how we interact with other people, all separate from gatekeepers, because we have social media, we have our own personal spiritual practice and ability to understand spiritual concepts. I always talk about Martin Luther when I talk about the third house because he had about 4 planets there in Libra. And without Martin Luther, there is no America. There are no Protestants to escape religious persecution and come to America without Martin Luther. Because Martin Luther said, oh my gosh, do you believe that Jesus actually paid the cost already and I don't have to do all this dumb stuff to beat myself up over my sins? Right? This is Martin Luther. And so this is the third house. This idea that you can create your own interfacing with the divine, that you have your own connection with the divine. Not only that, the third house is also your near relatives like siblings and cousins and pretty much anybody beside your parents. So, what kind of conflict are you dealing with your siblings, Scorpio rising? What kind of relationships and changes are happening with your family? In what ways have you not been entitled before that you kind of feel like, you know what, it's time. It's time for me to make a break. It's time for me to separate. It's time for me to do my own thing. This is for Scorpio rising. What male siblings are you having issues with? Okay, or what male siblings are having issues in their own right that may require your competence, your sobriety. Okay, now we are finally at Sagittarius rising, and this is your second house, Sagittarius. Your second house is your earned income, your material assets and resources, and all of the things that support you. The material money things, your possessions, things that you purchase and buy, and what you do with your money, how you get it. So for Sagittarius, financial autonomy, that is the word of the day for you. And transactional has very, very significant meaning, both for Gemini and Sagittarius rising, because we're dealing with the money houses. But transactional can apply to a lot of different areas of life or topics. But specifically for Sagittarius rising, what are you doing with what you've got? How do you earn your money? And in what ways are you willing to do something you've never done before to have the autonomy that you desire financially? What kind of risks are you taking? Again, if you are born during the day, after sunrise but before sunset, this can mean some unexpected expenses come up that require you to get down to business and be very sober about your finances, your money, and how you earn it. But for those born during the night, this can be a much more constructive transit. And in general, because Mars is exalted in Capricorn, that means that some of the more destructive tendencies of Mars are kind of tapered down and abated due to the cold and dry nature of Saturn, right? Saturn rules Capricorn and will be in command of Mars. Okay, so I think that that's really about it. I don't have anything else to add. I feel like I've been really thorough. I hope that you've gone to thepeoplesoracle.com and found the guide there that helps you erect your sidereal birth chart so you can make sure you're using the correct signs. These horoscopes that I've given will not apply to tropical, okay? Um, Other than that, I am going to be tweeting about this forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. So you should be following me on Twitter at People's Oracle. I tie in current events. I've been talking about this Mars retrograde with Bitcoin. I've been talking about all of the different corporations and political figureheads and celebrities who are about to get their comeuppance because they have not been soberly assessing their lives. And so now the hammer's got to come down. But I'll be talking about the eclipse. I'll be talking about Mars triggering all of these degrees. And I will also post the graphic with the correction made for all of the dates for Mars and Capricorn. If you have my 2018 Sidereal Astrology Guide, which you can download in digital format on my website, thepeoplesoracle.com, now is the time for you to go back to January and February and figure out what was happening then. Hopefully you took really good notes, and so you've got a great reference point for the thoughts and considerations that you had in preparation for this Mars and retrograde transit. If you don't have your 2018 Sidereal Astrology Guide, you can still download it and you can still think about that time period so that you can be prepared for how you're going to use this upcoming energy. I hope you guys have a great end of this week. Is it Friday? Right, it's Friday. It's the weekend. So enjoy your weekend in Chicago. If you are here, I am going to be at Haji Healing Salon, which is an expertly curating healing salon. You got yoga, you got community acupuncture and various forms of body work on the south side of Chicago. Unheard of, non-existent, totally unprecedented, right? I love it. So if you are interested in experiencing yoga for the first time or for the 20th time, if you've never had acupuncture because it's been outside of your budget, you should come to Haji Healing Salon. Again, I will post that for you. This is going to be this Sunday, April 29th, just in time for the full moon in Sidereal Libra. Other than that, thank you guys for tuning in, and check out my blog, thepeoplesoracle.com. I'll be filling in the rest of the details, and make sure you follow me on Twitter at People's Oracle. You guys have a great weekend. Bye.